I'm going to talk to you about what's going on in the world and what to do about it. So I want to just mention three people I think you'll probably feel are people you admire and would like to be like, I suppose. So I want to mention George Orwell, first of all. So as you probably know, he wrote a book called 1984. And in the book 1984, he said 2 plus 2 equals 4. Don't know if you remember that. He said 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. And his point, of course, was that in a totalitarian society, you can make 2 plus 2 equals 5 and everyone will agree. Then I want to mention Hannah Arendt, the Jewish German philosopher. Again, I don't know if you know, but in 1933, she was forced to flee from Nazi Germany. And in 1934, she pronounced that you're either in resistance to the Nazi regime or you're complicit in it. There's not a middle ground. She said that in 1934. And lastly, I want to mention a guy called Larry Kramer. So Larry Kramer founded ACT UP, which was the direct action movement on AIDS in the 1980s. And his famous phrase was, if you don't get out in the streets, you're going to fucking die. So I won't explain that one. So I think my remit, as I'm supposed to be talking about COP, I did go to COP in Glasgow for 17 hours. I think I was the only person at that conference to make a speech that mentioned the word fuck, and that's my claim to fame. I think I said the word fuck about 15 times. So maybe that's all I need to say about that. The proposition I want to make is that in the decade or two before 2021, the proposition that a revolution is either inevitable or necessary would have been rather stupid idea, or at least I would have found it a rather stupid idea, and I'm sure many of you would have. I come from a business background. I'm an empiricist. I like to see what's going on and base my opinions upon evidence. So my first proposition is, after COP26, a revolution is now both inevitable and necessary. That's my proposition. And the second proposition is, if you're a liberal, and by a liberal I mean someone who believes in the Western rights-based philosophy of life, the philosophy promoted by Orwell, Arendt, and Larry Kramer, if you're a liberal, then you now have to be a revolutionary. That's my proposition. All right, so how I'm going to argue this is by talking to you about the climate crisis. The climate crisis is not to do with the climate, and it's not a crisis. What we're facing is the extinction of the human race in the next 1, 2, or 3 generations, according to the peer-reviewed literature written by the world's top scientists. It's not to do with the climate. The climate will exist long after we go extinct. It's not a crisis. It's the end of the world, because it is the end of the world. Okay? I spoke to one of the world's leading scientists about 6 months ago. He'd just written an article for the Conversation website where the world's leading academics write articles for the rest of us. And in that article, which has been downloaded about 2 million times, he said, along with two of the other world's leading scientists, that at the Paris conference of 2015, quote, this is more or less a direct quote, he said, "We did not know of a single scientist at 2015 Paris conference who thought that it was possible to stay under 1.5 degrees centigrade." Did you get that? I did a Facebook post and suggested that you stick that quote in your fridge and you read it every day for a month until you're in a mad rage. Because for the last 6 years, the whole climate industry, the climate movements have been going around the world going, follow the science, stay below 1.5 degrees. The world scientific community came to the conclusion that we're not going to stay under 1.5 degrees 6 years ago. In other words, before I tell you about the climate crisis, you have to understand one clear sociological fact, which is we have been systematically lied to by the global establishment for 30 years. This was not just a few bad apples. This was the whole damn thing. Making this systematic lie, it's possible to stay under 1.5. It is not possible to stay under 1.5. That's gone. It's physics, right? I spoke to the scientist and he said, "Roger, what you have to understand is the vast majority of the world's scientists are white, middle class, from the global north, tenured professors at the world's most elite universities." And then he said, and this is a direct quote, they do not want to rock the boat. There's plenty of people in this conference who do not want to rock the boat because they're making money. They're making money from the proposition it's still okay. It's not still okay. The critical decade, as the UN said at the time, was 2010 to 2020. There's a real world out there. The 2020s are the decade of consequences. What are those consequences? I spoke to another of the world's leading scientists from Rotterdam, a professor, I think, at Rotterdam University. He'd just written a paper called "The Future of the Human Niche." What do you think the future of the human niche means? What it means is where people live and where people die. So it turns out that at 2 degrees centigrade, which incidentally they established is 7 degrees centigrade in land. Could you get me some water? They established at 2 degrees centigrade in a peer-reviewed paper by 3 of the world's scientists, world-class scientists, that 1,000 million people will live in areas that are uninhabitable. 1,000 million people will live in areas which are uninhabitable in approximately 15 years' time, according to peer-reviewed papers. Because we're heading over 1.5 by the end of this decade. Go and get a ruler, look at the graph. In 15 years, we're looking at social collapse in the Sahel, in Southern Europe, in the Middle East, in Northern India, Indonesia, Australia. Don't take this from me. I'm just some, weird Welsh farmer, right? Take it from the main guys. If you're going to be persuaded, you want to talk to an expert, right? If your doctor tells you you've got cancer, you know what you want to do. You want to go to the top doctor in your capital city, like in Brussels, right? Pay £10,000 and get the proper diagnosis. The diagnosis from the world's experts is that we're facing global social collapse in 2 decades. So let's talk about another expert, Sir David King. Sir David King is arguably the top scientist in the United Kingdom. He's the former chief scientific advisor to the British government. He's not a maverick. He's not an idiot. He's Oxbridge, okay? He's a top guy. What did he say on the record earlier this year in Australia? He said, we have to move quickly. What we do, I believe, in the next 3 to 4 years will determine the future of humanity. What we do in the next 3 to 4 years will determine the future of humanity. This is Britain's top scientist. What do you think that means? What do you think Oxbridge-educated men of a certain age mean when they say, will determine the future of humanity? What he means is billions of people are going to starve to death. I know one of the leading lawyers in London. He knows Sir David King. Sir David King will not use the word billion because Oxbridge people talk in euphemisms. I'm from Manchester. My culture is to call a spade a spade. The situation is fucked, guys. It's fucked. Don't take it from me. Take it from Sir David King. I'm a sociologist. My job is to translate, interpret reality. This is what the world's top scientists are saying. So let's get on to revolution. A revolution is now inevitable. Let me say, first of all, I'm from a business background. I've got no particular attraction to the notion of revolution. There's a sociology of the revolution, right? That's like liberal scholars. You can go and read the literature. The literature says that when societies get to a certain tipping point, they become incapable of reform. It's an analytical point. It's not saying reformism is bad. It's not saying everything in this hall is bad. It's just saying it's fucked at this point in history. Because we have now locked in a revolutionary period, because for the last 30 years, the international liberal class refused to stand up to the corporates, right? We lost that battle. It's done. A revolutionary period is now inevitable because we need system change. Why do we need system change? Because capitalism is incapable of reforming itself. It's systemic. I've got a friend who used to work for Bill Gates. He goes around the world selling ecological fuel. He went to one of the world's top companies and said, have this ecological fuel. Do you know what the guy said? He said, what does it cost? What does it cost? That's capitalism. Profit maximization, externalization of costs. Where you have capitalism, you have extinction at this stage of history. There's something called the collective action problem. We saw this at COP. There was a British minister saying to the Australians, can you reduce coal production? The Australians said to the British, go away. You can get rid of your North Sea oil. It's the collective action problem. I don't want to change because you don't want to change. The system's incapable of reform. The third reason why we're heading towards revolution is organizational inertia. All of you are sitting here agreeing with me. But how many of them will change your institutions? Probably none. Why? Because of organizational inertia. At King's College, where I did my research, I went to the central hall and along with other students poured paint over the Gothic hall with those nice colonial statues. £10,000 worth of damage. In 5 minutes, the vice principal was down to talk to us. I then went on a 2-week hunger strike. It was the fastest divestment campaign in history. 3 weeks. The important thing to understand, though, is the vice principal agreed with me. We were in the middle of an existential crisis. He agreed. Why didn't he do anything? Because someone needs to kick him up the arse to get him to move. You get how it works? Organizational inertia. That's why we're going to hell. Why is a revolution justified and necessary? Because we're part of a European tradition. What's our tradition? You don't go around killing people just because you want to. That's tyranny, right? In my country, we had an English civil war to establish the principle that government is not above the law. You don't have the divine right of kings. You can't go around raping, slaughtering, killing people just because you want to. John Locke, right? When the government engages in an act of war against the population has the absolute right and duty to rebel, period. That's the tradition we're from. That developed into the notion of inalienable rights. Do you remember that? Non-negotiable rights. Every human being on this planet has the right to life, the right to livelihood. These are non-negotiable, right? What does non-negotiable mean? What does it mean in COP to go to a government and say, you will not engage in policies that result in the starvation of billions of people? What it means is, when that government says no, you enter into an act of war against the government. That's the tradition. Because it's non-negotiable, right? If you want to be part of the rights tradition, you have to be in a state of war against your governments. Go and read John Locke. Do you get it? Climate change is not about the climate. Climate change is a genocide project designed by the world's elites to destroy the lives of billions of people in the next 2 decades. That's the project. Don't look shocked. It's happened many times in human histories. This is what elites do on a regular basis. They kill people. Why is a revolution in your self-interest? Let's be honest with ourselves, right? We're very privileged people. We can jettison our rights tradition because we're not going to die tomorrow. But it's in your self-interest to enter into civil resistance against your governments. Because when 1,000 million people are on the move, in 15 years' time, guess what? There'll be a world economic depression. You won't be getting your pensions. You won't be getting your pay increase. You won't be getting those grants because governments will be in fiscal crises. It's in your self-interest to act now. What I like to say to people is, consider going to the dentist in 10, 15 years' time and they've run out of anesthetic. It's going to hurt physically. This is about you. When I was 18, I went to India to a civil rights group. The week before I arrived, 20 workers were shot in a textile strike. Then the police went into the villages of the workers and raped the wives of those workers. I was 18. Do you know what the leader of the civil rights group said to me? Said, get back to the global north and bring down the governments that are creating our oppression. That's what people believed in 1982, before the neoliberal period. We've had 30 years of neoliberal humanitarian reformism. That's the end. That period has now finished. We're reverting to the 20th century model of revolutionary activity. It's in your self-interest to make that transition, because if you don't make that transition, it's in your self-interest to do so. Why? Because people will hate you. I'm a social scientist. I've researched this stuff, right? The people that get hated in revolutions most are the liberals. Why? Because they tried to be nice and didn't tell people the truth. Maybe some of you are going to go to Colombia, let's say, and do a drugs program. But if you're going to be honest, you're going to say, here's the drugs program, but in 5 years' time, there's going to be social collapse, people are going to lose their jobs, and there's going to be a massive increase in drug abuse, regardless of my humanitarianism. And maybe you're going to go to Nairobi or somewhere like that and do a great program on women's health. But you're not going to tell them, are you, that within 10 years, all the men from Kenya are going to be in war with refugees coming out of the Sahel, and brutalized men are going to come through Nairobi and rape the women in a mass rape. You're not going to say that to them. Or you're going to go to India and say, I'm going to dig you wells because I'm a humanitarian. But in 10 years' time, it's going to be 55 degrees centigrade for 3 weeks, and 10 million people in this region are going to fry to death. Are you going to say that to them? You see the conundrum you're in. Are you going to be honest? And if you're not going to be honest, these people will hate you because they'll say to you, you tried to help us, but you lied. You lied to us. You know, it's like giving people a towel before they go into the shower, right? Because it's not a shower, it's a gas chamber. It's like giving people some gloves to wear when they have to dig the pits. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? It's only 70 years since millions of people were killed on this continent. It's going to happen again. Never again, but it's going to happen again. And the primary reason why it's going to happen again is because the global liberal humanitarian class is looking the other way, is standing by while the greatest genocide in human history is being planned and administered and enacted against the most vulnerable people on this planet. It's an obscenity. What does civil resistance look like then? What does a revolution look like? What does the actuality look like? I'm a practical man. I designed this stuff. It's easy. That's the good news. It takes 3 to 6 months. It goes like this. You go to your humanitarian organization and you say, we will not negotiate on inalienable rights. We are going to put a line in the sand with the French government. We're going to put a line in the sand with the German government and say, if you violate inalienable rights, we will make a demand and we will enter into civil resistance against you, like they did in World War II. Because what's coming down the line is 1,000,000 times worse. You make a demand, and then your leaders go on tour. And they tell the German public what I told you just now, because they have a right to know in a democracy, right? You're the leaders. You have a responsibility to tell them what is coming down the line. Inevitably. And then you set a date. And your leaders go on hunger strike. And your staff prepare to lose your assets. And your supporters go and stand and sit in the road. And they block the motorways. They block the town centres. That's what you have to do. I'm not telling you this because I'm an ideologue. I'm not telling you this because I'm radical. I'm not telling you this because I'm a revolutionary. I'm telling it you because I know, because I've done the fucking research. This is how social change works. I did the design work for Extinction Rebellion. I produced the design for April 2019 when 10,000 people went to London. 1,200 people were arrested. 5 sites were blocked. The whole of a global city came to a standstill. It was the biggest event in the climate change situation in 30 years. It made Extinction Rebellion the most successful climate movement in 2019. 200,000 people joined. It's set up in 64 countries. Because for the first time in 30 years, people have a sense, right, of what it looks like to create change. That's how it works. That's what your organizations have to do. They need to have an emergency meeting. And earlier this year, 4 people designed Insulate Britain. They had £10,000, 4 people, got 120 people to sit on the motorways in Britain, and within 4 weeks, we had 90% name recognition, 270 articles in the British press, over 50 TV interviews, dozens of interviews in the other press. 9 people have just gone to prison yesterday for 9 months, 6 months, 4 months. That's what it looks like. You have to be prepared as liberals to go to prison. This is it. Just as your grandparents died in World War II, just as your great-grandparents struggled for the most basic rights, that's your responsibility. Nothing else is going to save you. This is how it's going to work. You're going to go to the leaders of your organizations, and they're going to say no. That's what's going to happen, right? Why are they going to say no? Because they're the collaborators. They're the appeasers. They're the house slaves of the neoliberal system. How you're going to change is by doing what I did. You go into your office, you throw paint on the office, and you go on hunger strike. And I will predict you have a 50-50 chance of changing your NGO. Nothing else is going to work. That's how you're going to do it. And if you don't do it, don't pretend you're in the great liberal civilizational tradition of this continent. You're not. You're betraying it. You're betraying Orwell. 2 + 2 = 4. No, it does. If you don't act, you're saying 2 + 2 = 5, right? You're not in the tradition of Hannah Arendt. You're in complicity. And you're not in the tradition of Larry Kramer, because you are going to die because you're not going to get in the streets. And maybe you're thinking, who cares about a New York queen, right? Well, let me tell you, I went to talk to a Harvard professor. You know what he said to me? He said, Roger, what you have to understand is we need geoengineering. We need to cover the whole of the Sahara and the whole of India with mirrors. That's what he said to me. And do you know what he said to me privately? And this is my final comment. He said, if you don't do this, in 5 years, you're going to be dead. You're going to be dead. That's all I've got to say.
Anybody got a question for Roger? Sandy.
Thank you, Roger. I really found that an amazing and inspiring presentation. I'm just interested in why you've chosen insulation to be the sort of pivot for your latest demonstrations and so on. That's one question. The other really is most of the damage is coming out of China, India, and America. And are you in any way cooperating with people in those countries to do what you're doing here?
Insulation isn't the issue. The issue is that it's not an issue, obviously, but the point here goes in the British press. There's not a single article that said insulation is a bad idea. Everyone knows what has to be done, right? The problem is like at King's College, you have to give the whole thing a kick. A non-violent kick is going to be to close the motorways. You see, like, with all due respect, your class, my class, right? We're all in a cognitive cult. right? We all think that it's about information. We all think we have to be smart. It's not. It's about disruption and it's about emotion. You know, that's why we put working class people to talk to the media, because they're incoherent, but they're emotional, right? You know, your time is up, you know, with all due respect. You understand what I'm saying? You're either going to create a popular movement or you're going to be that little liberal little bit on the edge of society. And when the fascists come, that's going to be the end of you, like 1933. You have to make alliances. All of you have to give up your jobs and for 5 days a week, go into the towns and cities of your country and say we're totally fucked. Otherwise, they're all going to vote for fascists. That's the project, right? Forget insulation. Forget China and India. This is Europe, right? This is Europe. What does it mean? What did it mean for Orwell? What did it mean for Hannah Arendt? What does it mean to be in a European civilization? What it means is, I will not stand aside and allow tyranny to prevail. Yeah? Forget China. Who gives a fuck? This is Europe. We have a sense of honor. We have a sense of tradition. Over my fucking dead body, right? You've got to get up and show some emotion. Seriously. We'll find someone who can. You need Larry Kramer. Go and watch Larry Kramer.
Roger, we'll call it there because actually we've run over time.
Shall we go over there?
Carry on over there. Carry on into the what's it called?
No.
The
Hang on a
Ideas
minute.
Hub.
This is my visual aid. Please take a photo of it. You email this, and then you get like an information pack on how to do it. Don't say that I don't know any NGO tricks. Okay, you only ever need one visual aid, which is your pathway to action.